The sound of the elevator chimed as I stepped into the grand lobby of the Lafayette Club, the weight of the silver-wrapped gift box heavy in my arms. I had been invited, at least I thought I had. Maxwell and Nicole's anniversary was a celebration I helped fund, planned, and organized. But as I approached the hostess, her smile faltered. "I'm sorry, you're not on the list." The world spun around me. How could this happen? I had been there through it all, from the late nights to the long hours, the financial support, the sacrifices. Yet now, standing outside the doors of the event I helped create, I realized something painful. I was no longer part of their world. I didn't just lose my invitation, I lost my place in their lives, and this was just the beginning. The soft chime of the elevator echoed through the pristine lobby of the Lafayette Club, and Lillian stepped out, her black heels clicking on the polished marble floor. In her arms, she held a silver-wrapped gift box, its weight a silent reminder of the anticipation and excitement she felt as she made her way toward the ballroom. This was supposed to be a night of celebration, a joyous occasion marking the 10th anniversary of her son Maxwell and his wife Nicole. Lillian had poured her heart and soul into planning this evening, and she couldn't wait to see the smiles on their faces when they opened the thoughtful gift she had carefully chosen. But as she approached the hostess stand, a tight smile greeted her, and the young woman looked up with an expression that seemed to falter for just a second. "Good evening," Lillian said, smoothing the front of her black dress. "I'm here for the Morgan anniversary celebration." The hostess's fingers moved quickly across the tablet in her hands, her brow furrowing as she scanned the screen. "Let me just check," she said, her voice polite but distant. Lillian waited, heart thudding in her chest. She had been invited, she was certain of it. She had spoken with Nicole herself just a week ago, and everything had been arranged. She shifted her weight, trying to steady her nerves, but the unease was creeping in. The hostess looked up again, her smile strained. "I'm sorry, ma'am," she said, "but I don't see your name on the list." Lillian's breath caught in her throat. She stared at the hostess, thinking this had to be some sort of mistake. "I'm sure there's been some confusion," Lillian said, her voice faltering slightly. "My name is Lillian Morgan. I helped organize this event. I paid the deposit for the venue. There must be some mistake." The hostess's eyes flicked to the screen again, her fingers tapping the tablet, scrolling through the list in an almost robotic manner. "I'm afraid there's nothing here for you," she repeated. Her voice was apologetic, but there was no warmth in it. "Perhaps you could speak with the event coordinator." Lillian's mind raced as she tried to comprehend what was happening. She had no reason to be excluded from this event. She had been an integral part of the planning process. Hell, she had paid for half of it. Her son Maxwell had asked her to help, and she had gladly obliged, thinking it would be a wonderful way to show her support for their marriage. Confused and increasingly uncomfortable, Lillian glanced past the hostess, her gaze drifting toward the ballroom doors. She could hear the soft hum of music and the clinking of champagne glasses. Laughter drifted through the air, and she caught sight of several familiar faces mingling inside, people she had known for years. Among them was Martine, her cousin, already tipsy and holding court at a table near the center. The sight made her stomach twist. It felt like she was on the outside looking in. Lillian's heart sank as she turned back to the hostess. "I need to speak with Maxwell," she said, her voice steadier now, but the unease was still there, gnawing at her. "Can you please let him know I'm here?" The hostess hesitated, then nodded. "I'll get the coordinator," she said, her tone businesslike. She turned to walk toward the back of the room, leaving Lillian standing there, her mind spinning with confusion. Lillian stood for a moment, trying to calm the churning storm in her chest. This was ridiculous. There had to be an explanation. Maybe there was some sort of misunderstanding. Maybe Maxwell didn't know about the mix-up. She had planned everything down to the last detail. She'd made sure the flowers were perfect, that the music would be just right. She had even arranged for the special gift for the couple, a pair of matching watches engraved with their anniversary date. She wanted tonight to be special, a reflection of her love for them both. As she waited, Lillian's eyes wandered back to the ballroom. She could see Maxwell through the frosted glass doors, standing near the bar, his tuxedo sharp, his face set in an expression that seemed distant. Her heart skipped. There was no joy in his gaze, no recognition when he caught sight of her. Lillian took a breath, squared her shoulders, and moved toward the doors, ready to confront the situation head on. But as she stepped closer, the doors suddenly swung open, and there she was, Nicole, the woman who had become her daughter-in-law, but who, in truth, felt more like a stranger every day. Nicole's eyes landed on Lillian instantly, her expression perfectly composed, but Lillian could feel the coldness emanating from her. "You're not on the list," Nicole said, her voice sweet but empty of warmth. Lillian's stomach twisted at the words. "Nicole, There's no room for you here," Nicole cut her off, her tone leaving no room for argument. "We don't need you to be here." Lillian's chest tightened, but she tried to remain calm. This wasn't how it was supposed to be. She had helped raise Maxwell, supported him in every way she could. She had given everything to make sure he had the best possible life. And this was how they repaid her? "I paid for this room," Lillian said softly, her voice trembling slightly. "This event wouldn't have happened without me. You can't just shut me out like this." Nicole's eyes flicked to the hostess, who stood off to the side, then to someone behind her. A man in a dark suit was approaching. Security. Lillian's breath caught in her throat as the realization hit her. She wasn't just being excluded from the event. She was being escorted out. Maxwell stepped into the hallway just as security approached, his gaze flicking toward her, but never quite meeting her eyes. His face was impassive, colder than she had ever seen it. He was standing there, silent, not even trying to intervene. "Maxwell?" Lillian said, her voice unsteady now. "What is this?" He didn't respond immediately. He glanced at the security guard, then at the hostess, his face blank. "I told you not to come," he murmured, his words barely audible over the soft hum of the room. "This isn't the time." The security guard stepped forward, gently but firmly placing a hand on Lillian's shoulder. She didn't argue. She didn't fight. She walked away, her grip on the gift box tightening as she moved toward the elevator. The silver wrapping, the blue ribbon, it all seemed so pointless now. It was still there, still clinging to the box, like the remnants of a life that no longer mattered. Lillian stepped away from the grand doors of the ballroom, her heart heavy, but her face dry. She didn't cry. She had done enough of that over the years. The tears, the frustration, the silent sacrifices. She had spent her life giving and giving, and this was the result. She didn't have the energy for tears anymore. Her heels clicked sharply on the marble floor as she made her way back to the elevator. Every step felt like an echo of her own disillusionment. When the doors slid open, she stepped inside, pressing the button for the parking garage. The ride down felt endless. The soft hum of the elevator did nothing to comfort her. Instead, it seemed to amplify the thoughts swirling in her mind, the confusion, the anger, the sense of betrayal. As the elevator descended, she found herself thinking about the years she had spent building her family. She had done everything for Maxwell, everything she could. From the day he was born, she had been there, helping him with school, holding his hand through the painful teenage years, and supporting his every decision. But it was clear now. None of it had mattered. Maxwell, her son, had let Nicole take control of everything, and he hadn't said a word. He hadn't fought for her. She was nothing more than a financial support system, a lifeline for them to reach out to when things got tough. But when it came to her being part of their life, when it came to family, she was irrelevant. Lillian exhaled sharply as the elevator came to a halt. The doors opened to the parking garage and she stepped out. She made her way to her car, her fingers clenching around the handle of the gift box she had brought for the couple. The silver wrapping felt cold against her palm. She didn't care about the gift anymore. The thought of giving them something, anything, seemed absurd. She opened the car door, throwing the box onto the passenger seat, then slid into the driver's seat herself. The engine hummed to life as she backed out of her parking spot, the harsh headlights of other cars reflecting off the sleek surfaces of the garage. As she drove out into the night, the weight in her chest grew heavier. She had spent years sacrificing for them, sacrificing her own time, her own dreams, her own well-being. And for what? To be tossed aside like she was nothing? The streets were quiet as she drove, the hum of her car's engine, the only sound in the still night. Her mind wandered back to the early years, to the time when Maxwell had been her whole world. She had loved him fiercely. She had watched him grow, from a small boy with big dreams to the man he had become. And through every moment, she had been there. Every scraped knee, every school play, every late-night conversation, she had been there. And it was always the same. She worked. She sacrificed. She gave him what he needed, both emotionally and financially. When Maxwell had struggled with his career after college, it was her money that had helped keep him afloat. When he needed the down payment for his first house, it was her check that made it possible. She had always been there, in the background, quietly ensuring his success. But what had he given her in return? What had she received for all the years of hard work and sacrifice? The answer was simple. Nothing. Maxwell hadn't asked her about her needs. He hadn't cared about what she wanted. All that mattered to him was his own success, his own happiness, and Nicole's. It was clear now that they had both moved on from her. Lillian gripped the steering wheel tightly, her knuckles white. A sharp pang of grief shot through her chest. She had always believed that family meant everything, but now she felt more like a stranger to them than she had ever felt before. She had given them her all, and in return, they had taken her for granted. She couldn't continue to live like this. She couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine, that her sacrifices didn't matter. But instead of crying, instead of wallowing in the pain, Lillian made a decision. She wouldn't let this define her. She would not let herself be sidelined, cast aside like she had no value. No, she would take control. It was time for her to stop being the invisible woman behind the scenes. It was time to start living for herself. Her thoughts shifted toward the future, toward what her next steps would be. Lillian had spent so many years living for others that she had forgotten who she was. She had forgotten her own dreams, her own ambitions. But she wouldn't do that anymore. She had an entire life ahead of her, and it was time to reclaim it. Her eyes flicked to the gift box beside her on the passenger seat. She had bought it with such care, choosing something meaningful, something that she hoped would bring Maxwell and Nicole joy. But now, it seemed insignificant. The box wasn't a symbol of love. It was a reminder of her position in their lives, a reminder that her place was no longer where she thought it was. Lillian knew one thing for certain. She wasn't going to keep giving, not without receiving anything in return, not anymore. As she drove down the empty streets, the quiet night stretched out before her, and for the first time in a long time, she felt a sense of clarity. It was time for her to take a step back. It was time for her to stop being the one who always sacrificed. She had given enough. Now it was her turn to live, to find happiness in the way that she had always put aside for others. The pain of tonight would not define her. It would fuel her. And she would move forward, no longer invisible, no longer the afterthought. As she drove, Lillian's thoughts turned to what she would do next. She had put away her own dreams for too long. The time had come for her to stop being invisible, to stop being the mother and the provider, and start being Lillian, the woman who could stand on her own, who could find joy and purpose without depending on anyone else. And that journey, she realized, would begin now. Lillian drove home in a daze, her thoughts a tangled mess. The streets were dark and the flickering lights cast long shadows along the road. She could barely remember the drive back, her mind occupied with the image of Maxwell standing there in the hallway, avoiding her gaze. She felt the sting of rejection deep in her chest. She had done everything for him, but now it felt like all of it had been for nothing. She pulled into the driveway and sat in the car for a moment, staring at the house in front of her, the house where Maxwell had grown up, where they had celebrated countless birthdays, holidays, and milestones together. It was supposed to be a place of warmth, a family, a sanctuary. But tonight, It felt like a reminder of everything she had lost. The doors to the house, once open to her, now seemed like an impenetrable wall. She grabbed the gift box from the passenger seat and walked slowly to the front door, her steps heavy with exhaustion. She didn't even want to look at the box anymore. It had been a symbol of her love and effort, but now it felt like a joke, one that only she had been in on. Lillian unlocked the door and stepped inside, the familiar scent of old wood and the faint aroma of flowers filling her nose. She set the box down on the entry table and walked into the living room, her eyes scanning the walls. Photographs. So many photographs. Pictures of Maxwell at every stage of his life. His first day of school, his high school graduation, his college years, and beyond. Each frame was a frozen moment, a memory captured in time. She walked over to one of the frames, her fingers brushing against the glass. It was a picture of Maxwell and her, taken years ago at his high school graduation. She was smiling, her face filled with pride as he stood next to her in his cap and gown. She remembered that day clearly. She had been so proud of him, of everything he had accomplished. She had worked so hard to make sure he had every opportunity, and that day, she thought it had all been worth it. But now, that picture felt distant, like a dream she couldn't quite reach. Lillian sighed and moved toward another photograph, this time of a family vacation they had taken when Maxwell was 10. The image was a blur of sun-drenched smiles and laughter. She could almost hear the sound of Maxwell's laughter as he ran around, his small legs carrying him faster than she could keep up. They had stayed in a cabin in the mountains, far away from the hustle and bustle of the city. It had been one of the happiest times in their lives. They had been a family then, united, full of love. But as Lillian stared at the picture, the warmth it had once held faded away. The house, the memories, they no longer felt like part of the family she had known. She had given everything to them. Her time, her money, her energy. And now it was all slipping through her fingers like sand. She walked to the hallway and opened a cabinet that held a small collection of keepsakes, mementos from Maxwell's childhood. She pulled out a small box, its lid covered in fading stickers from a trip they had taken to Disneyland when he was only 6. Inside, there were trinkets, ticket stubs, and little notes he had made for her. Lillian smiled softly as she lifted a tiny drawing Maxwell had made for her when he was about 4. It was a picture of her with big eyes and a smile that stretched from ear to ear, holding his hand. She remembered that drawing. It had been the first time Maxwell had ever shown any real interest in art, and she had kept it as a reminder of how far they had come. But now, as she held the drawing, something in her chest tightened. It felt like a memory that belonged to someone else, someone who was long gone. Her son, the boy who had once drawn this for her, was no longer the same person. Maxwell had grown up, and somewhere along the way, he had forgotten her. Forgotten the sacrifices she had made. Forgotten the love she had given him. Lillian set the drawing down on the table, her fingers lingering on its edges. A tear slipped down her cheek, but she quickly wiped it away. She wouldn't cry, not now. Not anymore. She had spent too many years pretending that everything was fine, that her sacrifices meant something, but the truth was undeniable. Her son had moved on. He no longer needed her, and now he barely even remembered her. She moved on to another shelf, one filled with more keepsakes, trophies, ribbons, and medals from Maxwell's many achievements. She picked up a trophy from his Little League days. He had been so proud of it back then. She remembered watching him run around the field, his face flushed with excitement, his energy infectious. She had been his biggest cheerleader, always there in the stands, always supporting him. But now, as she held the trophy in her hands, it felt hollow. It was a reminder of the boy he had been, the boy who had once needed her. But now, that boy had been replaced by a man who seemed to have forgotten everything she had done for him. Lillian's chest tightened as she realized the painful truth. The memories, the mementos, they meant nothing to Maxwell anymore. He had moved on. He had a family of his own now, and she was just a distant figure in the background, someone who was no longer part of his world. The thought hit her like a punch to the gut. She had given so much to him, but now she was nothing more than a forgotten chapter in his life. The love she had shown him, the sacrifices she had made, it was all gone, erased by time and by Nicole's influence. Lillian set the trophy down and looked around the room, her eyes taking in the photographs once more. She could feel the weight of every memory, every moment she had spent with Maxwell, pressing down on her. But she couldn't hold on to it anymore. She couldn't keep pretending that everything was the same. It was time to let go. She walked out of the living room and into the kitchen, her eyes glancing at the counter where she had once set the dinner table for family meals. She thought about the meals she had prepared, the conversations they had shared, the laughter that used to fill the house. But now, all that was left was silence. She no longer mattered. Lillian turned off the lights in the kitchen and walked toward the stairs. As she climbed to the second floor, she made a silent vow to herself. It was time for her to move forward. It was time to stop giving and start living for herself. She wouldn't let the pain of tonight define her. She would reclaim her life. She would no longer be the forgotten mother, the invisible woman in the background. She would find her own purpose again, and this time, she would do it for herself. Lillian sat at the kitchen table, the dim light from the lamp above casting shadows across the room. The house felt quieter now, emptier, as if it too understood the loss she was experiencing. She hadn't realized until this moment how deeply she had let her own life slip away while focusing on Maxwell, on Nicole, and on everything they needed. For the first time, the weight of her own sacrifices seemed suffocating. She looked at the journal in front of her, its cover worn from years of use. It had been a habit she had picked up when Maxwell was still young, a way to document everything she did for him, everything she gave. But as she opened it, the realization hit her like a wave. The pages were filled with lists, expenses, notes about school fees, payments for his first car, down payments for his apartment, loans for his business ventures. Every entry was a reminder of what she had done, the way she had given without asking for anything in return. Lillian ran her fingers over the pages, reading through the familiar entries. Paid for Maxwell's college tuition, $15,000. Covered the cost of his first car, $10,000. Bought furniture for his new apartment, $5,000. The figures seemed insignificant now, lost in the sea of past decisions. But as she read each line, the realization dawned on her. Maxwell had never even acknowledged these efforts. No thank you note, no mention of gratitude. Nothing. She had given him everything, and yet it felt like she was invisible to him. Her throat tightened. The tears she had refused to cry earlier began to sting her eyes, but she held them back. She was done with feeling sorry for herself. She wasn't going to let herself be consumed by this emptiness. She was tired of the silence, tired of the coldness from Maxwell and Nicole. She had spent years silently carrying their burdens, making sure they never had to worry about anything. And now, she was left with nothing but the painful truth. She had been taken for granted. Lillian pushed the journal aside, the weight of the pages too much to bear. She stood up from the table, her mind racing. It was time to make a change. She couldn't go on living this way. She couldn't keep pouring herself into a family that had forgotten her, that only reached out to her when they needed something. She had to stop living in the past, stop regretting the things she had done. She had to start living for herself. Her eyes flicked to the window, where the first signs of dawn were creeping through the blinds. She had always loved the mornings, the quiet before the world woke up. It had been her time to reflect, to plan. And today, she knew she had to plan a new life. She wouldn't let herself be defined by the past any longer. Just as she was about to gather her thoughts, her phone buzzed. The noise broke the silence, and she picked it up, surprised to see a name she hadn't thought about in years, Thalia. Thalia had been her closest friend when Maxwell was young, someone who understood the struggles of being a single mother, someone who had always been there for her. They had lost touch over the years, each of them busy with their own lives, but the familiar name on her phone gave her a strange sense of comfort. She hesitated for a moment before answering. Lillian? Talia's voice came through the phone, warm and familiar. Is everything okay? I haven't heard from you in so long. Lillian felt a lump form in her throat. She hadn't realized how much she had missed hearing Talia's voice. I'm fine, Lillian replied, her voice sounding much steadier than she felt. I've been going through some things. Talia was silent for a moment, and then she said gently, You don't sound fine, Lillian. I know we haven't talked in a while, but I can hear it in your voice. You sound lonely, and I don't think that's how you should feel. You've always been so strong, so focused on everything and everyone around you. But now, it's time to take care of you. It's time to take a step back and let someone else be there for you. Lillian felt a tear slip down her cheek. She had been so consumed by her own sacrifices that she had forgotten how to reach out for help. Talia's words, so simple yet so full of understanding, pierced through the walls Lillian had built around herself. I don't even know where to begin, Lillian whispered, her voice cracking slightly. I feel so lost, Talia. It's like everything I've done has been for nothing. I gave everything to my family, to Maxwell, and now I'm just invisible. Talia's voice softened with empathy. You're not invisible, Lillian. You're just not being seen by the people who should see you. But you're still here, and you're still worthy of love and respect. It's time for you to stop giving without receiving. You've earned your time, your space. You don't need to be the one who always sacrifices. Let me take you out, okay? Let's catch up. You deserve more than what you're getting right now. Lillian's heart fluttered at Talia's words. It had been so long since someone had reached out to her like this, offered her something more than just pity. She hadn't realized how desperately she had needed this connection. You're right, Lillian said quietly, her voice filled with a sense of relief she hadn't expected. I've been holding on to everything, thinking I was doing the right thing, but I can't keep living this way. Then let me help, Talia said. Let's get together soon. I'll be there for you. You don't have to do this alone. Lillian smiled for the first time that day, a small spark of hope flickering inside her. For the first time in a long time, she felt like there was a way forward. It wasn't just about moving on from Maxwell and Nicole. It was about finding herself again. And Talia's offer, her friendship, was the first step toward rebuilding her life. Thank you, Talia, Lillian said, her voice trembling slightly. I don't know what I'd do without you. I'm here for you, Talia replied, her voice warm and reassuring. Always. As Lillian hung up the phone, she sat in the silence of the kitchen, her heart beating a little faster. For the first time in a long time, she felt a flicker of hope. She didn't have to carry this weight alone. There was a chance for a new beginning, a chance to reclaim her life, and this time she wouldn't do it for anyone but herself. Lillian sat in her living room, the morning sun filtering through the curtains, casting a soft, golden glow on everything it touched. The house was quiet, eerily quiet, and for the first time in a long time, she found herself at peace. There was no pressure, no expectation hanging over her head. For years, she had lived in the shadow of her role as a mother, as a provider, as someone who was always there for others. But today, things were different. Today, she would begin to reclaim the life she had set aside for so long. Her fingers brushed over the journal she had been reading the night before. She had made a decision. No more supporting Maxwell financially. No more feeling like she was obligated to bail him out of every tough situation. It was time for her to stop being the one who carried the weight of his life on her shoulders. Lillian took a deep breath and picked up her phone. She had already made the decision, but now she needed to follow through. She went through her bank statements, setting aside the money that she had always sent to Maxwell, whether for his rent, business expenses, or whatever new crisis had come up. This time, there would be no checks written, no deposits made. With shaking hands, she went to the app on her phone and set up new parameters for her account. She canceled the automatic transfers to his bank account, and with a deep exhale, she closed the app. The weight she had been carrying for so many years felt lighter now. Lillian knew this wasn't just about money. It was about reclaiming her sense of self-worth. She had spent so long putting everyone else first, including Maxwell, that she had forgotten how to prioritize her own needs. But no more. She had spent enough time giving. It was time for her to start taking. The phone buzzed in her hand, interrupting her thoughts. She hesitated before answering, but when she saw the name flash on the screen, Maxwell, she froze. Her heart skipped a beat. She hadn't spoken to him since the night of the anniversary party. The conversation hadn't gone well, and she had no idea what he might want now. But she took a deep breath and answered anyway. "Mom!" Maxwell's voice came through the phone, sounding strained, almost defeated. I need to talk to you." Lillian sat back on the couch, her fingers tightening around the phone. She had known this moment was coming, but part of her had hoped it wouldn't. Part of her had hoped he would figure things out on his own. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice as calm as she could manage. "Look, I'm in a tough spot," Maxwell said, his words hurried. "I'm behind on some bills, and I'm really struggling right now. I know we haven't talked in a while, but I need your help. Can you send me some money?" Lillian felt her pulse quicken. She had been expecting this. He had always come to her when he needed something, but when it came to giving back, when it came to showing any appreciation, he was always absent. This time, though, she wasn't going to give in. This time, she wasn't going to fall into the familiar trap. "No, Maxwell," she said firmly, her voice steady. "I won't help you this time." There was a long silence on the other end of the line, and for a moment, Lillian wondered if he was processing what she had just said. Finally, he spoke again, his tone edged with disbelief. "What do you mean you won't help me? Mom, I'm asking you, I'm in real trouble here." Lillian closed her eyes for a moment, gathering her thoughts. She could hear the desperation in his voice, but it no longer affected her the way it once had. She had always been there for him, always jumped at the chance to lend a hand, but now she had nothing left to give. Not when it meant losing herself in the process. "I know you're struggling, Maxwell," Lillian said, her voice softer now, "but I can't keep doing this. I've spent my whole life bailing you out, and you've never even tried to figure things out on your own. I've given you everything, my time, my money, my energy, and it's never been enough for you. You've never once stopped to consider what I need. It's time for me to stop enabling you. You have to find your own way." Maxwell was silent for a moment, and when he spoke again, his voice sounded strained. "So you're just going to abandon me? After everything I've done? You can't just leave me hanging like this, Mom." Lillian felt a pang of sadness, but she refused to let it derail her. This was the hardest thing she had ever done, but it was the right thing. She wasn't abandoning him. She was finally giving him the space to grow up and take responsibility for his own life. "I'm not abandoning you, Maxwell," Lillian said, her voice unwavering. "I'm just stepping back. I need to take care of myself now. I've spent too many years worrying about you, and I've neglected my own needs in the process. It's time for me to start living for myself. You need to do the same." Maxwell didn't respond immediately. Lillian could feel the tension on the other end of the line, but she stood her ground. She had made her decision, and there was no going back now. After a long pause, Maxwell finally spoke, his voice lower and resigned. "Fine, I get it. I'll figure it out. But you're still my mom, right?" Lillian's heart softened, but she knew what she had to do. "I'll always be your mom, Maxwell, but I'm no longer the person you can rely on for everything. You have to start standing on your own 2 feet." The line went silent again, and this time Lillian didn't try to fill the void. It was the end of something, but it was also the beginning of something new. She hung up the phone and let out a breath she hadn't realized she had been holding. She had done it. She had taken the first step toward reclaiming her life. Lillian leaned back against the couch and closed her eyes. The decision to stop helping Maxwell, to stop allowing him to rely on her, felt freeing. But she knew this was just the beginning. There was so much more to do, so much more she needed to figure out. It was time to focus on herself. She had been neglecting her own happiness for too long. There were things she had wanted to do, things she had put on hold for years, like returning to her art. She had been an artist once, before life had taken over. It was time to rediscover that part of herself. Lillian made a mental note to call the local art studio the next day. She was going to start taking classes again. It wouldn't be easy, but it was time to reconnect with the person she had once been, the person she had lost along the way. Lillian sat at the kitchen table, her phone in her hands, staring at the screen as she prepared to make one of the hardest decisions she had ever made. The contracts, the transfers, the money that had always been flowing to Maxwell. It all had to stop. She had decided this was the only way forward for her, the only way to reclaim her life. But as she began to dial the first number, a wave of uncertainty washed over her. She took a deep breath and called the first bank where Maxwell's name was attached to her account. She had always been the one to handle their finances, managing everything quietly from the background. She had been the safety net, the cushion they relied on. But now, as she heard the voice on the other end of the line, the reality of her decision started to settle in. "Hello, this is Lillian Morgan. I need to cancel the automatic payments I've been making for my son's accounts. Please take me off all financial obligations connected to these services." There was a long pause. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Morgan, but we have all your details set up for these transfers. Are you sure you want to make such a drastic change?" Lillian's fingers tightened around the phone. "Yes, I'm sure. This is a decision I've made. Please proceed." Another pause, followed by the hesitant sound of typing. "Are you certain, Mrs. Morgan? This is a significant change. There's really no way to reverse this if you choose to change your mind." "I'm sure," Lillian said firmly, her voice unwavering. "I don't want to be involved with these payments anymore. Please, cancel them." The line went silent for a moment longer before the representative reluctantly agreed to proceed with the cancellation. The conversation ended, but Lillian sat there for a while, staring at the empty space in front of her. Her decision had been made, and while part of her felt a deep sadness for what had to be done, another part of her felt an unexpected sense of freedom. Next, she called the financial planner who had been helping manage Maxwell's investments. It took longer to get through, but the conversation was much the same. The shock in the planner's voice was clear, the disbelief that Lillian would stop supporting Maxwell in such a public, permanent way. But again, Lillian stood firm, not wavering. "I've made my decision," she said, her voice steady. "I need to stop supporting him in this way. Please finalize all accounts and cut ties with me as a financial guarantor. I'm no longer available for these commitments." By the time the last call ended, it felt like the weight of years had been lifted. It wasn't easy, but Lillian was resolute. She knew in her heart this was the right choice for her. There would be no more living in the shadow of someone else's needs. She had spent far too long prioritizing everyone else, especially Maxwell, at the expense of her own happiness. Now it was time to focus on herself. Later that evening, Lillian found herself feeling a strange mixture of relief and fear. The financial calls were behind her, but the emotional part of the process, the part of her that longed for validation and connection with her son, still lingered. She wasn't sure where this new path would lead, but she knew she couldn't turn back. The hardest part was over. That night, Lillian decided to take a step further into her new life. She had always loved art, but somewhere between raising Maxwell and keeping up with the demands of life, her own passions had taken a back seat. She pulled up the local art center's website and saw that they offered evening drawing and painting classes. The website was inviting, filled with images of vibrant artwork and smiling faces, and for the first time in ages, Lillian felt a spark of excitement. Without hesitation, she signed up for the next available class. She knew it wouldn't be easy, getting back into the swing of things, but it felt like the perfect first step. Art had always been a way for her to express herself, a way to create something meaningful in a world that often felt like it was slipping through her fingers. And now, it was time to rediscover that part of her. The following week, Lillian attended her first class. When she walked into the studio, she felt a slight hesitation in her chest. Being around new people, especially after so many years of isolation, was a challenge. But the warm, welcoming atmosphere of the studio quickly put her at ease. The walls were adorned with colorful canvases, and the sound of brushes gently gliding against paper filled the air. She sat down at an easel, picked up a charcoal pencil, and began to sketch. The first few minutes were awkward. Her hand shook slightly as she tried to find the rhythm again. But then something magical happened. The tension in her body eased, and the act of drawing brought her a sense of calm she hadn't felt in so long. The lines on the page became her anchor, grounding her in the present moment. She had always loved the process of creation, the feeling of making something from nothing, and now she was doing it again. The class was small, just a handful of women, all of them working on their own projects. As the evening went on, Lillian found herself chatting with the others during breaks, exchanging stories about their lives. There was Caroline, a retired teacher who had taken up painting after her children had grown, and Emily, a young woman who had just started her career in graphic design. They all shared a love for art, but more importantly, they shared a willingness to embrace something new. It was exactly what Lillian needed. These conversations, these connections, were filling the empty spaces she had neglected for so long. By the end of the class, Lillian felt something she hadn't felt in years, a sense of belonging. She didn't need to be a perfect artist, but for the first time in a long time, she was doing something that made her feel alive. These women had become more than just classmates. They had become her first step toward reclaiming her own identity. They made her feel valued for who she was, not for what she could give. As she walked to her car that evening, Lillian felt a lightness in her heart. She had made the right decision. She wasn't invisible anymore. She wasn't just someone's mother, someone's caretaker. She was Lillian. And this was only the beginning. As the weeks passed, Lillian continued to immerse herself in art. Every evening after dinner, she would retreat to her small studio at the back of the house, her old easel now standing proudly in the corner, its surface waiting for the brushstrokes she had denied for so long. She hadn't realized how much she had missed it. The simple act of creation, the stillness, the quiet focus. It felt like coming home. The soft click of the brush against the canvas was soothing, grounding her in a way she hadn't expected. She could feel her hand returning to its old rhythm, the familiar movements of sketching and painting, reawakening memories of a time before life had overwhelmed her with responsibilities. It was in these moments, hunched over her canvas, that she felt the most herself. No longer was she bound by the needs of others, by expectations or duties. Here, in the silence of her studio, she was free. But it wasn't just the act of painting that brought her peace. It was the act of reclaiming something that had always been hers. For years, Lillian had put others first, especially Maxwell, at the cost of her own happiness and her dreams. Now she was finally taking the time to pursue what she had always loved. She was no longer the invisible mother, the one who was there only to support and never to be seen. She was Lillian, an artist, a woman rediscovering herself. The paintings that filled her studio began to reflect her transformation. They were raw, expressive, filled with emotions she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. Some were abstract, splashes of color that seemed to capture her feelings of frustration and longing. Others were more detailed, softer pieces that depicted quiet moments of solitude, reflections of the calm she had found in her own company. One afternoon, as Lillian was finishing a piece that had taken her weeks to complete, she received a call from Thalia. Her friend's voice was bright and full of energy, and it immediately lifted Lillian's spirits. Thalia had always been a source of warmth in her life, a reminder of the good things in the world, and the connection they shared was one of the few things that had remained constant. "Lillian, you won't believe it," Talia said, her voice crackling with excitement. "There's an art exhibition coming up at the local gallery, and they're looking for submissions. I think you should send in some of your work. You've been painting so much lately, and I can see the progress you've made. It's time you share your talent with the world." Lillian hesitated for a moment. The idea of showing her work to others was daunting. She had always kept her art private, a personal expression of her innermost thoughts and emotions. The thought of putting it on display for others to critique made her stomach churn, but there was something in Thalia's voice, something encouraging and insistent that made Lillian consider it more seriously. "I don't know, Thalia," Lillian said, her voice uncertain. "I haven't done something like this in so long. What if no one likes it? What if I'm not good enough?" "Lillian, you've been holding yourself back for too long," Thalia replied, her voice firm yet kind. "This isn't about being perfect. It's about sharing what you've created, about stepping into the light after all these years of living in the shadows. You have something special, and the world deserves to see it. I'm telling you, you're ready." Lillian closed her eyes, her mind racing with 1,000 doubts. She had always been her harshest critic, afraid of being judged, of failing. But as she stood there in the quiet of her studio, surrounded by the paintings she had poured so much of herself into, something inside her began to shift. Maybe it was time. Time to stop holding back, time to stop letting fear control her. She had spent too many years living for others, afraid of what people might think, but now she had a chance to live for herself. She had to take it. "I'll do it," Lillian said, her voice steady now. "I'll send in some of my paintings." "That's the spirit," Thalia said, sounding thrilled. "I knew you'd come around. I'm so proud of you, Lillian." After hanging up the phone, Lillian sat back down at her easel. She looked at the paintings around her, each one a snapshot of the emotional journey she had been on. The colors, the brushstrokes, they told a story that no words could capture. She realized that her art wasn't just about the images on the canvas. It was about reclaiming her own voice, her own space in the world. It was about owning who she was and what she had created. For the next few days, Lillian carefully selected a few pieces to submit to the exhibition. Each one felt like a piece of her soul, a reflection of her journey from the mother who had sacrificed everything to the woman who was now beginning to live for herself. She knew that showing these paintings would be a vulnerable act, but it was also a courageous one. It was a step toward embracing the life she deserved. The day she sent off her submission, Lillian felt a mix of exhilaration and fear. She had taken a leap, and she wasn't sure where it would lead. But for the first time in a long time, she felt proud of herself. She wasn't just doing this for anyone else. She was doing it for herself. A few weeks later, Lillian received an email from the gallery. Her heart raced as she opened it, her fingers trembling with anticipation. When she read the words, she felt a rush of emotions flood through her. Excitement, disbelief, and most of all, joy. The gallery had accepted her paintings into the exhibition. They wanted to showcase her work. Lillian sat back in her chair, staring at the screen. She had done it. She had taken a chance on herself, and it had paid off. This was just the beginning. The next step was the exhibition, and Lillian knew that no matter what happened, she had already won. She had stepped into the light, embraced her passion, and shared her art with the world. The fear, the doubt, the hesitation, they were still there, but they no longer controlled her. Lillian had found something more powerful, the courage to be herself, to pursue her dreams, and to finally live a life that was hers to create. The night of the exhibition arrived, and Lillian felt a mixture of excitement and anxiety bubbling inside her. She had spent the last few weeks preparing, and as she stood in front of the gallery, she couldn't help but feel a bit of disbelief. It had been years since she had shared her work with anyone, and now her paintings were going to be on display for the public. The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. The gallery was beautifully lit, its white walls adorned with colorful works of art from various artists. As she walked through the space, Lillian felt a sense of awe. There were so many incredible pieces, each one telling a story in its own way. But as she moved deeper into the gallery, her heart began to race. She had never imagined her paintings would be placed in the same room as these professional works. The room was full of visitors, art enthusiasts, critics, and collectors, and she felt like an outsider, unsure of what to expect. Her eyes drifted to her own paintings, displayed at the far end of the room. They stood in stark contrast to the others. While some were vibrant and full of energy, others were more somber and reflective, the colors muted yet powerful in their stillness. It was a reflection of who Lillian was now, a woman in the process of rebuilding, finding herself after years of living for others. At first, she felt like she was invisible, standing in the background as people milled about the gallery, admiring the art. But as she moved closer to her pieces, she heard whispers, soft voices, complimenting her work, admiring the raw emotion in the brushstrokes. Lillian's heart skipped a beat. Was it possible? Were people actually noticing her work? She overheard one woman say to her friend, "This piece here, look at the emotion in those colors. It's like it captures a deep sense of longing. It really speaks to me." Lillian felt a flush of warmth spread through her chest. She wasn't just an anonymous figure anymore. Her work was making an impact. She wasn't invisible. For the first time in a long while, she felt seen. It was a strange and powerful feeling. The validation she had been seeking, not from her family, but from a world she had ignored for so long, was here. And it was enough, more than enough. She continued to watch as people gathered around her paintings. Some were chatting animatedly about the technique, while others just stood in awe, silent and captivated. It was the kind of attention Lillian had never allowed herself to want, the kind of recognition that deep down she had always known she deserved, but had never sought. Lillian stood there, smiling to herself, watching the crowd. She had spent so many years pouring herself into others, into Maxwell, into Nicole, into the idea of family. She had given them everything, only to be ignored, dismissed, and ultimately forgotten. But this was different. She wasn't giving her soul away anymore. She was giving something that was truly hers, something that came from within, and it was being acknowledged. As she made her way around the room, a man approached her, tall with salt and pepper hair, wearing a tailored suit. He had been admiring one of her pieces from a distance, and Lillian couldn't help but feel a surge of nervous energy. "Excuse me," the man said with a friendly smile. "I just wanted to tell you how incredible your work is. There's something so poignant about the colors, so honest. It's very rare to see such raw emotion captured on canvas." Lillian felt a rush of warmth. She hadn't expected such praise, but it was exactly what she needed to hear. "Thank you," she said, her voice steady despite the nerves. "I'm glad it speaks to you." The man nodded, his gaze still focused on the painting. "I'm actually a collector," he continued, "and I would love to discuss acquiring some of your work. If you're interested, we can talk after the event." Lillian's eyes widened in surprise. A collector? Her work could be bought? She hadn't even considered that possibility. She had never painted for money. It had always been a way for her to express herself, to release the emotions that had been bottled up inside. But the thought of someone wanting to own one of her pieces, of her art being valued like that, was overwhelming. I'd love to talk more," Lillian said, her voice full of disbelief. The man smiled warmly. "Excellent. I'll make sure to find you before the night ends." As the man walked away, Lillian stood there for a moment, her heart racing. She had always kept her art to herself, hidden away in the solitude of her home. But now, it was being seen, and people were responding to it in ways she had never imagined. It felt like a door had been opened, one she hadn't even known was there. The exhibition continued, and Lillian couldn't help but feel the shift inside her. It was as if all the years of doubt, of feeling invisible, had melted away. She wasn't just an invisible mother anymore. She was an artist, someone with a voice, with a perspective, with something to contribute to the world, and people were taking notice. As the evening wore on, more and more people came to admire her work. Some were discussing it with enthusiasm, others taking pictures of her pieces, and a few even writing down her name. She could feel the buzz in the air, the energy of being part of something bigger than herself. It wasn't about the money or the recognition. It was about the sense of belonging, of being seen for who she truly was. Lillian moved through the room, exchanging pleasantries with the visitors, and for the first time in years, she didn't feel out of place. She wasn't just Maxwell's mother or Nicole's mother-in-law. She wasn't just the woman who had always put everyone else first. She was Lillian, the artist, and that, she realized, was enough. When the event finally drew to a close, Lillian felt a sense of fulfillment she had never experienced before. As she collected her things, she saw the collector approach her once again. "I'd like to discuss the details of acquiring some of your work," he said, handing her a business card. "You have real potential. I think you're just getting started." Lillian took the card, her fingers trembling slightly. She had taken the first step into a new chapter of her life, and she could already feel it changing her. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living, and for the first time, she knew that living for herself could bring a joy deeper than anything she had ever experienced. The phone call from Maxwell came late in the afternoon, as Lillian was preparing to put the finishing touches on a new painting. She had just started to mix the colors for a portrait she had been working on, trying to capture the quiet solitude she felt in this new chapter of her life. The sound of her phone buzzing on the table cut through the silence. She hadn't heard from him in weeks, and her first instinct was to ignore it. The pain from the anniversary party still lingered in her heart, and part of her wasn't sure if she was ready to face him. But then the phone buzzed again, more insistently this time. Maxwell's name flashed on the screen. She took a deep breath, set down her paintbrush, and answered. "Hello?" Lillian said, her voice steady but guarded. "Mom, it's me, Maxwell," came the hesitant voice on the other end. I've been thinking a lot lately, and I wanted to apologize. I'm sorry for how I treated you. I didn't mean to make you feel left out, and I certainly didn't mean to hurt you." Lillian held the phone tightly, her fingers pressing against the edge as she closed her eyes. She had known this moment would come, but hearing his voice, hearing the apology didn't bring the relief she expected. Instead, it brought a cold wave of bitterness. The wounds were still too fresh, and despite the apology, it wasn't enough to heal the years of neglect and hurt that had built up. "Maxwell," Lillian began, her voice quiet but firm, "I appreciate the apology, but it's not enough. It's not enough to fix everything that's been broken between us." There was silence on the other end of the line, a long pause that stretched into uncomfortable quiet. Lillian could hear Maxwell shifting, his breathing heavier now, as though he didn't know how to continue. Finally, he spoke again, his voice softer. "I know I've messed up, and I'll never be able to undo what I've done," he said. "But Mom, I just wanted you to know that I'm really sorry. I've been thinking a lot about everything, and I've realized how much you've done for me over the years. I should have appreciated you more. I should have been there for you." Lillian exhaled slowly, her heart tightening in her chest. It was hard to listen to him now, to hear him express remorse after everything that had happened. She had been there for him when no one else was, when he needed her most. She had given him everything, her time, her money, her love, and yet it had never been enough. Now it was as if he was asking for her forgiveness, for everything he had taken for granted. And the truth was, she wasn't sure she could just let it go. "I don't know if I can forgive you, Maxwell," she said, the words coming out more painfully than she had expected. "The damage has already been done. You've made it clear over the years that I wasn't really part of your life, except when you needed something. I don't think an apology can change that." Maxwell's voice dropped, a note of frustration creeping in. "Mom, I get it, okay? I know I screwed up. But you have to understand, I didn't know how to handle everything. With Nicole and the kids, things have been hard. And I've been struggling, okay? I didn't want to ask you for help again, but we're in trouble. We need money. And you've always been the one to help us." Lillian's heart skipped a beat. Her first instinct was to say no, to tell him that she couldn't keep doing this, couldn't keep being the one to rescue him. But then something in his voice made her pause. It wasn't the typical pleading she was used to hearing. There was something different this time, something more desperate. He was struggling, and yet after everything, she couldn't ignore the part of her that still wanted to help. "I don't think you understand, Maxwell," Lillian said slowly. "I can't just keep giving to you and Nicole Every time things get hard. I've done it for years, and I can't keep living my life for you. You're not a child anymore. You need to take responsibility for your own life." Maxwell was silent for a moment. Lillian could hear the faint sound of muffled voices in the background, Nicole's voice perhaps, or the sound of the children playing. Finally, he spoke again, his voice strained. "Mom, I get that you're upset, but you don't understand how bad things are," he said, frustration seeping into his tone. "Nicole and I are in deep. We're behind on bills, on everything. And this is your fault. You've always been there for us. You've always bailed us out when we needed it. But now, when we really need you, you're turning your back on us." Lillian's heart sank as she processed his words. The anger inside her surged, a fiery wave that burned through her chest. She had spent so many years helping them, sacrificing her own peace for their well-being, and now Maxwell was blaming her for their financial struggles? She could hardly believe it. "What do you mean, my fault?" Lillian demanded, her voice rising. "I've spent my entire life supporting you, Maxwell. I've given you everything I had. And now you're blaming me for your problems? You've never once stopped to think about what I've sacrificed. You think I can just keep giving?" The silence that followed felt suffocating. Lillian's chest was tight, her breathing uneven as she waited for Maxwell to respond. But it wasn't what she expected. Maxwell's voice came through low and almost apologetic. "I didn't mean it like that, Mom," he said. I'm sorry. I don't know what to do anymore. But I can't do this on my own. Please, I need your help." Lillian closed her eyes, her grip on the phone tightening as she processed everything he had just said. The hurt, the frustration. It was all building inside her. She had been there for him, given him everything she had, and now he was blaming her for their difficulties. The realization hit her hard. Maxwell wasn't the person she thought he was anymore. He had changed, and not for the better. "I can't keep doing this, Maxwell," she said, her voice steady but filled with an underlying sadness. "I've given you everything, and it's never been enough. I won't be your safety net anymore. You have to figure this out on your own." Maxwell's voice faltered, and for a moment, Lillian wondered if he truly understood the depth of what she was saying. "So that's it? You're just going to cut me off?" "I'm not cutting you off, Maxwell," Lillian said quietly. "I'm just stepping back. You need to take responsibility for your own life. I can't be your solution anymore." The line went silent, and for the first time in a long time, Lillian didn't feel the weight of guilt pressing down on her. She had made her decision, and it felt right. Lillian sat still in the chair, the phone now resting quietly on the table in front of her. The weight of the conversation with Maxwell hung in the air, thick and heavy. She didn't move, didn't reach for the glass of water on the counter, or glance at the unfinished painting across the room. She simply sat, allowing the silence to fill the space around her. The words Maxwell had said were still echoing in her ears, his apology, his pleas for help. She should have felt a sense of relief, of closure, but instead, she felt empty. The sting of betrayal had cut deeper than she had expected. She had always believed that Maxwell, her son, the person she had loved and sacrificed for above all else, would never take her for granted. But the truth was undeniable. He had used her repeatedly throughout the years. Each time he called for help, it had been an opportunity to reinforce his dependence on her, to weave her deeper into the cycle of giving without receiving. The realization hit her hard. She'd been giving so much of herself, pouring everything into him and into the idea of family. But what had she gotten in return? The answer was simple: nothing. And it wasn't just about money. It was about respect. It was about emotional reciprocity. Maxwell had never once stopped to consider her needs, her sacrifices. Lillian took a deep breath, pushing the emotions aside for the moment. She needed clarity. She needed to process everything before she made any decisions. Her heart ached, not just from the disappointment in her son, but from the years she had spent living in a fog, always putting others before herself, always being the one to give. She thought back to the countless times she had been there for Maxwell, his first car, his college tuition, the loans for his business ventures. It wasn't that she had minded helping him, it was the way she had done it without question, without ever considering her own feelings. In the beginning, when he was younger, it felt natural. She wanted to give him the best opportunities, to make sure he never had to struggle. But somewhere along the way, that had shifted. It wasn't about his future anymore. It was about him leaning on her, using her as a crutch to avoid taking responsibility for his own life. And that was where the real hurt came. Maxwell hadn't just relied on her. He had expected it. He had taken her for granted, as if she were a tool to be used whenever it was convenient for him. And when she had needed him, when she had wanted to feel like more than just a financial provider, he was nowhere to be found. Lillian exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of the years pressing down on her. She realized now that she had been living in the shadow of his needs, losing sight of her own. The woman who had once been so independent, so full of dreams and aspirations, had become someone who defined herself by what others needed from her. She had forgotten how to live for herself, how to find joy in the simple things. Her life had become about giving, but never receiving. But not anymore. Lillian's mind shifted as she began to think about her future. The first step had already been taken. She had stopped giving Maxwell the financial support he had come to expect. But that was only part of the equation. Now she had to stop emotionally supporting him too. She couldn't continue to let him take from her, to use her as his emotional cushion. She had to stop letting him manipulate her into thinking that his needs came before hers. A sense of resolve settled over her. She wasn't going to let him in so easily anymore. Not after everything. She would take her time with Maxwell. She would listen to him, yes, but she wouldn't let him back into her life without boundaries. She wouldn't allow herself to be his safety net any longer. And that wasn't out of anger. It was out of love. Real love. The kind that wanted what was best for both of them, not just one. Lillian stood up and walked toward her studio, the room where she had rediscovered herself. The room where her paintings now hung, each one a testament to her journey. Her fingers grazed the edges of the canvas on the wall as she stood there, looking at the colors and shapes that had once felt so foreign to her. Painting had become her therapy, her way of processing everything she had been through. But now, it was more than that. It was her freedom. It was her space to explore and create without the weight of others' expectations. She ran her hand along a piece she had been working on, a series of abstract swirls and colors that represented the turmoil she had been feeling. She could see it in the movement of the brushstrokes, the way the colors clashed against each other, the way they bled into each other. It was chaotic yet beautiful, just like her own emotions. She had poured everything she felt into the canvas, and now it felt like she was looking at her own soul laid bare. It was in that moment that Lillian realized something profound. She didn't need Maxwell's validation. She didn't need to be the person he relied on to feel important. She was already important. She was already valuable. She had spent too long thinking that her worth was tied to how much she could give, to how much others needed her. But now, she understood that her value wasn't dependent on anyone else. It was inherent in who she was, in the art she created, and in the life she had yet to live. For the first time in years, Lillian felt like she was standing on solid ground. She wasn't defined by Maxwell's needs or by the expectations of others. She was defined by who she was and what she had to offer the world, starting with her art. She wasn't ready to forgive Maxwell just yet, not fully. The hurt was still too fresh, but she had made peace with it. She had learned to love herself again, to put herself first, and that was something she hadn't done in a long time. As she continued to work in her studio, Lillian felt the weight of the past slowly lift. There was still a long way to go, but she was no longer afraid. She was no longer the woman who had been left behind. She was the woman who had found her voice, her strength, and her independence. And that, she realized, was just the beginning. Lillian's life had changed, and she was beginning to feel the freedom that had long eluded her. Each morning, she woke up with a sense of purpose. no longer weighed down by the demands of family or the expectations that had consumed her for so many years. Her days were filled with the quiet rhythm of painting and attending social events, things she had neglected for so long. She felt lighter, more at peace with herself. Her paintings had become a form of self-expression, and each stroke of the brush brought her a sense of catharsis. The once overwhelming emotions of resentment and loss had started to give way to something more freeing, a release, a sense of freedom she had not known in years. Every piece she completed felt like a victory. Each canvas was a reminder of her resilience and her ability to reclaim what had been hers all along. She had found a new rhythm in her life, one that no longer revolved around others' needs. No longer was she tethered to the ever-changing demands of Maxwell or Nicole. For the first time in years, she was living for herself. She spent her afternoons walking through the park, taking in the simple pleasures of the world around her, the warmth of the sun, the scent of fresh flowers, the sound of birds chirping. These moments were hers, and for once, she allowed herself to enjoy them without guilt. But the change didn't just come from her art or her walks. Lillian had also begun to reconnect with people outside her immediate family, people who valued her not for what she could do for them, but for who she was. She had joined a local book club where she found herself laughing and sharing stories with women from all walks of life. She began volunteering at a community center, offering free art classes to children. The joy she found in teaching and sharing her passion for painting was something she hadn't realized she was missing. It was in this newfound freedom that Lillian felt a sense of purpose. She had spent so many years prioritizing others that she had forgotten how to live for herself. But now, every day felt like a gift. She wasn't just surviving. She was thriving. She was rediscovering the woman she had been before motherhood, before the weight of expectations had taken its toll. And with each passing day, she felt more and more like the person she had always wanted to be. One quiet afternoon, while Lillian was sitting at her kitchen table, a letter arrived. The envelope was simple. Addressed in handwriting she didn't immediately recognize, the name at the top of the envelope stopped her heart for a brief moment. Naomi. Naomi, her granddaughter. Lillian hadn't heard from Naomi in years. After the wedding, after everything that had happened with Maxwell and Nicole, the entire family had distanced themselves from her. Naomi, who had once been a bright light in Lillian's life, had faded into the background, just like the rest of them. Lillian had often thought about her, wondering how she was doing, but there had been no calls, no messages, no letters. Now the sight of her name brought a strange mix of emotions. Hope, confusion, and something else she hadn't expected. Relief. Lillian opened the envelope carefully, unfolding the letter inside. It was written in Naomi's unmistakable handwriting, and as she read, Lillian's heart swelled with emotion. Dear Grandma Lillian, I hope this letter finds you well. I've been thinking about you a lot lately, and I wanted to reach out to let you know that I miss you. I know it's been a long time since we've spoken, and I regret that. I never stopped thinking about you, even though everything with the family changed. I want you to know that I understand now. I understand everything you did for us, for me, for all those years. I know how much you sacrificed and how hard you worked to make sure we had everything we needed. I've grown up a lot, and I see things differently now. I see you differently. I don't think you're the person they made you out to be. You're not a villain. You're not someone to be forgotten. You've always been kind and loving, and I want you to know that I see you for who you truly are. Please, I would love to see you again. I miss you, Grandma. If you're open to it, maybe we could meet for coffee sometime soon. Love. Naomi Lillian sat back in her chair, the letter still in her hands, her heart racing. She could hardly believe what she was reading. Naomi understood. She understood what Lillian had done for the family, understood the sacrifices, understood that she wasn't the villain in the story. It was like a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. For years, Lillian had carried the burden of feeling like she was the one who had failed the family, the one who had been forgotten and cast aside. But now, Naomi's words, her acknowledgement, felt like the first real validation Lillian had received in a long time. Lillian smiled through her tears. It was strange, but it felt like a long overdue reconciliation, not just with Naomi, but with herself. She had always believed that the love she gave had been enough, but for so long, it had felt like it wasn't. Now, Naomi was telling her that it had been, that she had made a difference, and for the first time in a long while, Lillian felt truly seen. The next morning, Lillian found herself dialing Naomi's number. Her hands trembled as she held the phone to her ear, waiting for the connection. After a few rings, Naomi's voice filled the air. "Hello?" Naomi answered, her voice hesitant but warm. "Naomi," Lillian said softly, her voice thick with emotion. "It's me, Grandma." There was a pause, and then Naomi's voice cracked with surprise and joy. "Grandma! Oh my God, I'm so happy you called. I didn't think you would." "I got your letter," Lillian said, a tear slipping down her cheek. "And I want to see you. I miss you too." The conversation continued, and as Lillian spoke with Naomi, something inside her shifted. She had spent so many years feeling like she had lost her place in her family, but now, with Naomi reaching out to her, Lillian realized that perhaps it wasn't too late to rebuild the connection she had lost. Maybe, just maybe, she could have the family she had always wanted, one that didn't need her to sacrifice everything for them, but one that valued her for who she was. They made plans to meet later that week, and as Lillian hung up the phone, a new sense of peace washed over her. She had been through so much, but now she felt like she was finally stepping into the future she had always dreamed of, one where she was seen, heard, and loved. The days following her conversation with Naomi felt like a turning point for Lillian. She had been standing on the edge of a new chapter in her life for weeks, unsure of what the next steps would be. But Naomi's letter had been the final nudge she needed. The words in that letter, words full of understanding and regret, had changed something inside of her. It was as if the fog that had clouded her vision for so long had started to clear. Naomi had seen her, truly seen her, and it made all the difference. But while the relationship with Naomi was healing, the one with Maxwell remained unresolved. Lillian had been through too much to forgive him just because he apologized. The damage was deeper than that. His reliance on her, his taking her for granted, had created a chasm between them that would take time to bridge. The wounds weren't healed with a simple apology, and Lillian wasn't ready to open her heart to him again. That didn't mean she didn't still care for him. Of course she did. He was her son, and no matter how much he had hurt her, that bond remained. But forgiveness would take time. And Lillian knew that she needed to focus on herself first, before trying to repair a relationship that had been broken for so long. She had spent her entire life prioritizing others, especially Maxwell. It was time to prioritize herself. The first step had been the financial boundary she had set with him. Now it was time to set emotional boundaries too. She couldn't allow him to continue to drain her in the way he had for so many years. She needed to reclaim her own life, her own joy, her own sense of worth. In the weeks that followed, Lillian found herself reaching out to Naomi more and more. She wrote back to her letter, her words filled with love and gratitude for Naomi's understanding. She invited Naomi to meet her at a small cafe in town, a place they had gone to when Naomi was younger. Lillian wanted to reconnect, to build a new relationship with her granddaughter, one that wasn't clouded by the past. When the day came for them to meet, Lillian felt a flutter of excitement in her chest. As she arrived at the cafe, she could see Naomi sitting at a table near the window, her face lighting up as soon as she saw Lillian approach. It had been years since they had seen each other face to face, and Lillian's heart swelled with warmth as she made her way over. Naomi stood up to greet her, pulling her into a gentle hug. "I'm so glad you came," Naomi said, her voice filled with sincerity. "I've missed you so much." Lillian smiled softly, feeling the weight of the years begin to lift. "I've missed you too, Naomi, so much." They sat down together, and over coffee, they talked for hours. Naomi shared stories of her life, her studies, her experiences. Lillian listened intently, enjoying the sound of Naomi's voice and the way she lit up when she spoke about her passions. For the first time in a long time, Lillian felt like she was truly connected to someone again. She wasn't just the woman who had been cast aside. She was a person with value, with something to give. She had a place in Naomi's life, and that meant everything. As they talked, Lillian realized how much she had missed these kinds of conversations. She had spent so many years caught up in the world of obligation and sacrifice, but now, for the first time, she was giving herself permission to enjoy life again. She wasn't just a mother, a caregiver, a provider. She was Lillian, and that was enough. Over the next few months, Lillian continued to rebuild her life. She attended more art classes, exploring new techniques, and creating pieces that brought her joy. She began to plan trips, things she had always wanted to do but had never had the chance. She joined local clubs, met new people, and allowed herself to experience life outside of the role she had been trapped in for so long. With each passing day, Lillian felt more and more free. She was no longer weighed down by the expectations of others. She had learned to say no, to protect her time, and to prioritize her own well-being. The financial boundaries she had set with Maxwell remained in place, and though he still called occasionally, Lillian no longer felt the need to answer every call. She had learned that she didn't owe him or anyone anything beyond what she was willing to give. One evening, as she walked through the park near her house, Lillian felt the familiar sense of peace she had been searching for. The leaves on the trees had just begun to change color, the air crisp with the promise of fall. She breathed deeply, taking in the sights and sounds around her. The world felt right. She felt right. And for the first time in years, she allowed herself to simply be. As she passed by a small pond, Lillian stopped to watch the ducks glide across the water. She smiled softly, feeling a sense of contentment that had eluded her for so long. She didn't need anyone else's approval, anyone else's validation. She was enough, just as she was, and that was all that mattered. Later that evening, Lillian received another call from Naomi. This time, there was a different tone in Naomi's voice, one that was full of excitement and possibility. "Grandma," Naomi said, her voice filled with energy. "I've been thinking about it, and I want to visit you. I'm coming for the weekend. I want to spend more time with you. I think it's time we really make up for the lost time." Lillian's heart swelled with happiness. It wasn't just that Naomi wanted to spend time with her, it was that Naomi understood. She understood the journey Lillian had been on, the healing she had been doing, and now they were going to build something new together, something that was based on love and respect. "I'd love that, Naomi," Lillian said, her voice filled with warmth. "I'm looking forward to it." As she hung up the phone, Lillian sat quietly, letting the silence settle around her. She wasn't looking for forgiveness from Maxwell anymore. She had already forgiven herself. She had already found peace. What she was building now was a life that was entirely her own, a life where she could embrace the love and joy she had been denied for so long. And for the first time, she felt free.